And the first one is a case of coastal protection. Now, here we looked at different options. We do have a concrete seawall that has been considered for the project. So again, that would be representing the gray infrastructure option. And then we have the more nature-based intervention option, which basically is represented by expanding dunes on the coastline as a way of reducing the potential damage of sea level rise. So on the one hand, we have a wall, a vertical wall that basically reduces the strength of waves and limits water spillover into agricultural land. In the other case, we have more of a smooth approach that expands the coastline with sand. Now, the size of this project is fairly big. The cost was 190 million euros. It's in the Netherlands. It's a small stretch of the coastline. And this project has been completed already. So this highlights that we can work both at new projects at planning stage, but also going through the lifetime of the infrastructure. We can also do an ex post assessment after implementation in case some of the outcomes of the project have not been monitored over time. So this case study is provided to show you how we develop a map that keeps track of all the indicators that are of relevance for the project. Now, this is a pretty technical part of the presentation where I show you exactly what we do with our counterparts. And normally we start with a blank screen and we start asking them, what are the main indicators that you use to assess the performance of the investment, or why basically do you do the investment? And here the answers we received were the following. There is flood risk. It is increasing with sea level rise. And if we don't do anything, there will be damage to public and private infrastructure. At the same time, there will be damage to private properties, housing, and that is what we want to avoid. Also, there will be a knock-on effect, because if we damage public infrastructure, let's say roads, then we are also going to have commercial activities that are impacted negatively. And that will ultimately result also in a potential loss of job creation in the area. Now, if we continue with the presentation, we see what are the consequences of that from a public point of view. If we have reduced property value, less commercial activities, and reduced job creation, then we have a reduction in public revenues. If public revenues decline, then we have problems with maintaining the infrastructure, for instance, the seawall. And then if we don't maintain it because we don't have resources at the local level, the functionality of that investment, that seawall, will probably decline, meaning that it will not be able to withstand waves and storms as well as it's supposed to do. And that results in an increase in flood risk. So basically here we show that there are some circular relations, we call feedback loops, that basically explain how the risk materializes throughout the system when we consider the outcomes of action or inaction. Now, this is what happens with the seawall, but then we can also look at, as an extra step, what happens if we use nature-based infrastructure. So in this case, if we introduce the dunes, which is what we add here, we can basically achieve the same type of goal. By adding the dunes, we are going to reduce the flood risk, we are going to reduce property value damage, we reduce the impact on infrastructure, we keep jobs and commercial activities, and we avoid the decline in public revenues. But again, we also have in this case to do maintenance. So at this stage, they're very manageable and comparable, the two options, the dune and the seawall, with the difference that the dunes will create more green space or space for the enjoyment of the population in the coastal area, and that may result in more job creation for supporting family getaways during the weekend, during the summer, and so on and so forth. But there are also a variety of other impacts of the dune that we have identified. For instance, it would provide carbon capture and sequestration. It provides water purification services. And so that possibly reduces public costs. Now, on the side of emissions, it is because the government has targets, like the European Union, to reduce emissions almost to net zero by 2045, 50 or so. Then water purification is a service provided by the municipality. So if we have water filtration with sand, we could potentially reduce the amount of wastewater treatment that is introduced. Next, we saw that the dune is also increasing biodiversity. which provides more property value. We are in a nicer environment as opposed to being on a cliff. We have a nicer environment with more biodiversity. It supports nutrient cycling, nitrogen and phosphorus. It reduces saltwater intrusion for agriculture, again, because of that natural filtration process. All these factors support recreation, as I mentioned earlier. Now, recreation, which could be expanded, enabled by increasing parking availability, which is higher if you have a longer stretch of the coastline with the dunes. So overall, we see that on top of reducing the risk of floods, the dunes support tourism creation, support agricultural production, support human health because it provides an opportunity for people to go outside and walk, so exercise. It potentially also reduces the travel time to go to a tourism destination, which is further away now in the absence of the dunes and the parks that are created, and it supports job creation. So basically, all things considered, as you can see in the representation we have with the red variables, the dune supports reaching both an increase of public revenues or avoiding decline in the first place by reducing the flood risk. It reduces public costs, and at the same time, it improves private well-being or the well-being of the citizens. Now, let me provide a summary so that it can be seen more explicitly. This is what the seawall would do. It supports public revenues, and it supports private well-being from an economic point of view, primarily. And this instead, next slide, is the contribution provided by the sand dunes, which provide both reduction of public costs, higher revenues, improved well-being, not only from an economic point of view, but also from a human health point of view, with exercise, enjoyment of the area, and so on and so forth. So here is the overall summary that we have created with our local stakeholders, which include the dredging association, representatives of the municipality, representatives of the local citizens and businesses, that has allowed us then to develop a mathematical model. Now, to give you an idea, this is what we do normally in our first meeting with the local counterparts, and developing this diagram takes about 2 to 3 hours maximum. After this task, we go on and collect the data, validate all these relationships that we have heard about, and then we proceed with the quantification of the model and the preparation of results and analysis. So again, this is just to give you an overview of how we do co-creation and customization in framing the analysis.